In this presentation, we'll talk about a very timely topic right now, and that's retirement income. Part of the reason it is so timely is that so many of the baby boomers are retiring every day, and they're facing many retirement risks. Those risks, those challenges include longevity risks. The idea that we don't know how long we will live in retirement. But we do know that improved healthcare services, improvements in medical technology is lengthening that retirement period. We realize that inflation can take a huge bite out of the purchasing power of retirement assets. We don't know what that number would be, but clearly the cost of inflation is a meaningful challenge. The sequence of market returns. Now we understand that in order to earn a higher expected rate of return, we need to hold risk. And we know that there's a lot of volatility in the stock market. The sequence of when you experience those negative returns can have a serious impact on your retirement nest egg. The uncertainty of future healthcare costs, inadequate savings going into the retirement period, unsustainable lifestyle expectations that can't be carried on or sustained through retirement based on the amount of retirement assets on hand. Changes in life circumstances, changes in legislation such as income tax rates, state tax laws, and of course, what we're seeing, the demise of the employer pension plans, as more and more employers opt away from a defined benefit plan towards defined contribution plans that shift the risks to the employees. And I think part of that and all the challenges and now less and less systematic income, it's really shifted the retirement when we think about retirement income towards creating a floor, replacing those missing pieces of systematic income, which would cover our essential living expenses, food, heat, lights on in the home. And I think this also shifted our focus as financial planners towards the need to identify the gap between guaranteed retirement income and essential living expenses. Note also the idea that once we can create that floor, the growth assets, the remaining portfolio, which can put into growth-oriented assets, can be used for discretionary expenses. Well, I think it's useful to take a moment and think about some investment philosophies. Those of you in this class may or may not have already taken Business 593, Investments in Portfolio Management course. If you did, then clearly Markowitz should look very, very familiar, perhaps life cycle investing. And if not, let me take a moment, because both of these philosophies apply as we take a look at that floor, why we create that floor, and also how we might invest the growth portfolios. Markowitz is, or in other words, modern portfolio theory is the idea that the most important decision is the asset allocation decision. Based on our clients' need, their risk tolerances, time horizons, personal preferences and constraints, and even tax issues, we can use a portfolio optimizer, to come up with an asset allocation mix, which will give the client the highest expected rate of return for a given level of risk. And that's what is referred to as that efficient frontier. Within the different asset allocations, there's security diversification. These concepts, as you'll see, will certainly apply to the growth portfolio. But the 2008-2009 market crash and recession refocus the financial planning community's eyes towards life cycle investing, a philosophy which takes into account that our personal wealth is a function of our financial wealth, our assets, and the present value of our future earning capacity, referred to as human capital. Based on that idea, it plays into how we would invest. Someone that has a high level of human capital, future earning capacity, and what does that tend to mean? It typically means the younger client with a longer horizon for working should have a greater focus on growth investments, because their human capital provides that systematic income. The financial assets have years and years to grow and take advantage of compounding interest. On the other hand, as our client approaches retirement and their human capital, future earnings capacity, is shrinking, then the asset allocation needs to move now from a growth orientation to a income orientation. The idea that the financial portfolio will support some of those systematic cash flows. So let's take a look at that floor. Let's take a few moments to explore how we might create guaranteed income for our clients. First of all, Social Security should be there. And personally, I believe that Social Security will be there in some format. It is not just a nest egg of money that's all being paid out. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. The problem right now is that the baby boomers, which represent a very high percentage of the population, they're moving from their working years into retirement, and the younger generations who are not as great in number are the ones still paying in. So there are certainly some conversations. You probably already talked about this earlier in this course, the idea of what's going to be done to mitigate that, what could be the circumstances. Perhaps it means that our clients will receive a lower PIA than originally anticipated. But I fully expect they'll receive some PIA, primary insurance amount. So the life income stream from Social Security, and by the way, Social Security was never meant to be a retirement plan. It was a safety net. It was there to provide some food, heat in the house, lights on, right? Some of the strategies is you could wait for normal retirement when you should receive 100% of your primary insurance amount. You could elect early benefits, which would reduce that amount. And from your study, you know that could fall into the area of around 70% of PIA based on a early retirement of 62. You also should recall that delaying Social Security benefits has the wonderful advantage of increasing the PIA by 8% a year. So someone who was by birth full retirement age being 66, and they wait till 70, there'd be 4 years of increase, so they would receive 132% of their PIA. A great strategy if you can do that. As you also learn, a non-working spouse is entitled to 50% of the wage-earning spouse's PIA, or the spouse who is also working would be entitled to either the higher of his or her PIA or 50% of the other spouse's PIA. An interesting strategy, which I wanted to share with you briefly, is the idea that a spouse could wait for age 70 to take his or her delayed benefits, but at age 65 or full retirement, whatever that would be able to put in a restricted application for the spousal, 50% the spousal benefit, and then at age 70, reverse it and take their own. This can add to the systematic income. The way this works is that the higher wage earner at full retirement age would file and suspend. That would put that person on the clock, so to speak. the spouse who had the lower projected PIA would elect at full retirement age this restricted application. If either spouse elects early benefits, then this strategy is no longer applicable. Employer pension plans. Some of your clients will benefit from having systematic income from employer plans. That could be government employees with pension plans, military pensions, servicemen and women who have served 20 years or longer in our military services, and some of the private corporations, the employer plans, defined benefit plans, and cash balance plans. As you learned in this course, more and more of those companies are moving away from defined benefit towards defined contribution. But one thing to think about is if your client is a participant in a defined contribution plan, then you should have that discussion about how the withdrawals will be taken. Right now, across the United States, the vast majority of employees will take a lump sum distribution, and that might not be the best choice. Perhaps some distribution schedule which would allow periodic cash flows over the lifetime might be the way to go. Annuities. Annuities are another vehicle for building streams of income that the client cannot outlive. And that could be an immediate annuity, a deferred annuity, and you can defer that for the start of retirement. You could refer that to age 85 or 90. And typically that type of deferred annuity is referred to as longevity insurance. Variable annuity with a guaranteed withdrawal rider, or laddered annuities. So this product can be very useful, again, in starting to fill in those gaps and create that floor for essential living expenses. Bond ladders are another strategy that you might consider in creating this systematic retirement income. On this slide, I show 16 years of bonds. In other words, at the end of each one of these, each year, over the 16-year period, there is a bond coming due. The idea is that the proceeds from that bond will be used to fund some of those expenses in the given year. If that bond is not needed, and you'll see one of the reasons why it would be with a growth portfolio. If it's not needed, it could be flipped to the end of the ladder, effectively adding another rung to that ladder, putting it higher. A reverse mortgage. Reverse mortgage, formally referred to as the home equity conversion mortgage, is another source of creating that systematic retirement income. It provides ongoing monthly income source until the owner moves or dies. In order to be eligible for a reverse mortgage, the homeowner must be 62 years old or older with equity in the home. The lender or the provider of this reverse mortgage, a bank, for example, agrees to pay a monthly amount until the individual moves or passes away, and the interest charge on that is based on a variable rate. Typically, the homeowner needs to be in a nursing facility for at least 1 year before the note is called. So someone going into a nursing home for 3 or 4 months would not cause the reverse mortgage to be called. If there are two spouses, one's in the nursing home and one is still living in the home, then it's not an issue at all. Growth assets. Now that you've established the full floor for those essential expenses, let's take a look at the growth assets. With guaranteed income in place, the client is more inclined to stay invested in the growth portfolio, and this is extremely important. We know that the growth assets could be used for discretionary spending. So in a given year that the market is down, the portfolio is down, the client could smooth out that spending and then resume some of those discretionary as the portfolio goes back up. Later on, if that systematic cash flow is not sufficient, perhaps due to inflation, purchasing power, then the growth portfolio asset allocation can be rebalanced in a way so that you start to throw off greater systematic cash flows. And that's what I show in this slide when I refer to it as repositioning the portfolio for income plus. Notice some of the securities that might be purchased from those growth assets, including private debt programs, bond portfolios and ETFs, income REITs. As far as the growth portfolio goes, those assets you're invested in for capital appreciation, which will certainly be quite valuable as you've been in retirement and you're getting upper in age, is the idea that maybe creating growth buckets. And I think this takes us back to that concept of age banding that you studied in week 1 in this course. The idea that retirement is not just one big period, it's based upon different bands or buckets. And because some of those bands that start when someone's 75, 85, or even 95, that puts a whole different perspective on how that portfolio can be invested in respect to volatility, expected return, and perceived risk. So think about that concept as you start contemplating and working with your client in managing and implementing those growth portfolios. Earlier, we talked about the bond ladder, and I quickly inferred this slide and this concept. Here's a combination. We have a bond ladder with a growth portfolio. And notice again, the individual bonds are structured so that it provides systematic income. But here we can say that if the growth portfolio has a gain in any given year, so that the capital appreciation, perhaps some of the dividends off of that, can be used for the everyday living expenses and perhaps some of the discretionary, then that bond can be flipped to the end of the ladder. And you can see how this could be self-maintaining, a check and balance. When years the market's down, the bond is used. Or in periods that the market's up a lot, now you're taking away some of those capital gains and using that for living expenses, and then extending your ladder. In this presentation, we explored the issue of retirement income, how you can work with your client in providing a floor for them, a floor which will pay for those necessary everyday living expenses, and how you can start to think about positioning that growth portfolio.